Hello, teacher. I hope you are having a good day. So today I'm going to talk about Stephen Krashen's theory of second language acquisition. And here is the list of group members who contributed in the creation of this presentation. So let's start from the background. So the founder of this theory, Stephen Krashen from University of Southern California, is an expert in the field of linguistics who specializes in the theories and methodologies of language acquisition and development. So majority of his research is related to the study of non-English and bilingual language acquisition. So he states that there is no basic difference between the way we acquire our mother tongue and our subsequent languages. So in our case, it would be English language, for instance. So he believes that humans have an inner ability that guides the language learning process. For example, children learn their first language by listening carefully to a spoken language that is usually made by their parents meaningful to them, right? So he considers that we acquire foreign languages in the same way. Hmm? So today I'm gonna try to answer such questions as what are Krashen's hypotheses, then how do they apply to the second language or foreign language classroom, and what do they look like in the classroom. Okay, so the first, so there are five hypotheses in Krashen's theory of SLA, which are the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the input hypothesis, the effective filter, and the final, the natural order hypothesis. So let's begin with the first one, which is the acquisition learning hypothesis. So the acquisition learning distinction is the most fundamental of the five hypotheses in Krashen's theory and the most widely known among linguists and language teachers. So according to Krashen, there are two main independent systems of foreign language performance, the acquired system and the learned system. So the first one, the acquired system, or so-called acquisition, is the product of a subconscious process very similar to the process children undergo when they acquire their first language. So it requires meaningful interaction in the target language, which is natural communication, right? So in which speakers are concentrated not in the form of their utterances, but in the communicative act. And the second one is the learned system, or so-called learning, is the product of formal instruction and it compromises a conscious process which results in conscious knowledge about the language. For example, knowledge of grammar rules. So a deductive approach in a teacher-centered setting produces learning, while an inductive approach in a student-centered setting leads to acquisition. And also, according to Stephen Krashen, learning is less important than acquisition. Okay, so the second hypothesis is the monitor hypothesis. So the monitor hypothesis explains the relationship between acquisition and learning, and it defines the influence of the learning on acquisition. Okay, so the monitoring function is the practical result of the learned grammar. According to Krashen, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator, while the learning system performs the role of the monitor or the editor. So the monitor acts in a planning, editing, and correcting function when three specific conditions are met, which are the second language learner has sufficient time at their disposal. The second one, they focus on form or think about correctness, or they know the rule. So it appears that the role of conscious learning is somewhat limited in second language acquisition. According to Stephen Krashen, the role of the monitor is minor, being used only to correct deviations from normal speech and to give speech a more like a polished appearance, okay, a better appearance. Okay, the next one is the input hypothesis. So the input hypothesis is Krashen's attempt to explain how the learner acquires a second language, how second language acquisition takes place. So the input hypothesis is only concerned with acquisition, not learning, okay? Only acquisition. So according to this hypothesis, the learner improves and progresses along the natural order when he or she receives second language input, that is one step beyond his or her current stage of linguistic competence or language level. For example, if a learner is at a stage I, let's say, then acquisition takes place when he or she is exposed to comprehensible input that belongs to level I plus 1. Since not all of the learners can be at the same level of linguistic competence at the same time, Krashen suggests that natural communicative input is the key to designing a syllabus, ensuring in this way that each learner will receive some I plus 1 input that is appropriate for his or her current stage of linguistic competence or English or language level. Okay. The next one is the affective filter hypothesis. So this hypothesis embodies Krashen's view that a number of affective variables play a facilitative but non-causal role in second language acquisition. So these variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and personality traits. So Krashen claims that learners with high motivation, self-confidence, a good self-image, um, a low level of anxiety and extroversion are better equipped for success in second language acquisition, while low motivation, low self esteem, anxiety, introversion, and inhibition can raise the affective filter and form a mental block that prevents comprehensible input from being used for acquisition. So, in other words, when the filter is up, it impedes language acquisition. So, on the other hand, positive effect is necessary but not sufficient on its own for acquisition to take place. Okay, and the last one is the natural order hypothesis. So, finally, the less important natural order hypothesis is based on research findings which suggested that the acquisition of grammatical structures follows a natural order which is predictable. For instance, for a given language, some grammatical structures tend to be acquired early while others late. This order seemed to be independent of the learner's age, L1 background, right? First language, conditions of exposure, and although the agreement between individual acquirers was not always 100% in the studies, there was statistically significant similarities that reinforced the existence of a natural order of language acquisition. So, Stephen Krashen, however, points out that the implication of the natural order hypothesis is not that a language program syllabus should be based on the order found in the studies. In fact, he rejects some grammatical sequencing when the goal is language acquisition, right? So, as I have mentioned before, language acquisition is the most important aspect in SLA, okay? Okay, now let's talk about how do these hypotheses apply to the second language or foreign language classroom. Okay, so let's start from the acquisition learning hypothesis. So according to this theory, the optimal, the easiest way a language is learned is through natural communication with communicators. So as a second language teacher, the ideal is to create a situation where language is used in order to fulfill authentic purposes. So this in turn will help students to acquire the language instead of just learning it, right? So learning acquisition is more important than just learning. Okay, next, the monitor hypothesis. So as a second language teacher, it will always be a challenge to strike a balance between encouraging accuracy and fluency in your students. So this balance will depend on numerous variables, including the language level of the students, the context of language use, and the personal goals of each student, of each learner. So this balance is also known as communicative competency. Okay. Okay, the next one is the input hypothesis. So this hypothesis highlights the importance of using the target language in the classroom. So the goal of any language program is for learners to be able to communicate and communicate effectively, efficiently. So by providing as much comprehensible input, which I have mentioned previously, by providing as much comprehensible input as possible, especially in situations when learners are not exposed to the target language outside of the classroom. So the teacher is able to create a more effective opportunity for language acquisition, right? So the teacher has to create a more efficient environment, right, for a productive language acquisition. Okay, and the next one is the effective filter hypothesis. So, in any aspect of education, it is always essential to create a safe, welcoming environment in which students can learn, can study. So, in language education, this may be especially vital since, in order to take in and produce language, learners have to feel that they are able to make mistakes, some errors, and take risks. Okay, so this relates directly to Krashen's hypothesis of the effective filter. And the last one is the natural order hypothesis. So in this classroom, teachers should know that certain structures of a language are easier to acquire than others, right? Because there are there are different structures of a language, and therefore language structures should be taught in an order that is conducive to learning. Okay, so teachers, for instance, should start by introducing language concepts that are relatively easy for learners to acquire, and then use scaffolding to introduce more difficult concepts. So by this I mean that teachers should start from the easy concepts towards the most difficult ones, right? So this is called scaffolding. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation. Thank you for your attention. Bye. Have a good day.